All right, today in lesson 3, we're going to be talking about independence for Texas. The learning objectives for today's lesson will be to identify the causes of conflict between Texan settlers and the Mexican government, to summarize the battles of the Texas War for Independence, including the Alamo and San Jacinto, and describe the process in which Texas became part of the United States. So we can see on the map below, Texas outlined in yellow. This is Mexican territory that borders the United States. So there's going to be lots of United States citizens that want to go into this new region for all the opportunities that we discussed in class earlier today. So opening Texas to Americans. Texas was a settled area belonging to Mexico on the border with the United States. Stephen Austin and 300 other families set up a colony in 1821 in Texas, and this was the first time that Americans had settled in Texas. The Spanish Empire had not allowed Americans to move into this region. Mexico was willing to. Austin became an impresario, or an agent, and his job was to persuade Americans to move into the region. Mexico wanted more people to live in this region because it was basically a wide open land that if people moved in there, they could tax them, and the Mexican government would be able to make money off of that. But it came with some restrictions. So Americans could get land in Mexico if they became Mexican citizens and they became Catholics. So they had to renounce their American citizenship and say that they were now Mexican citizens, and then they also had to renounce their Christianity, whatever branch of Christianity they were, most likely not Catholic, and say that they were Catholics. However, many settlers rejected Mexican customs and the Catholic religion. They didn't want to be anything different from what they were, so they immigrated into this area and refused to adopt the customs of that region. So they would have become Catholic, but it was only a face value type of thing. A small rebellion led Mexico to close its borders to new American settlers, and they passed high taxes on imported goods. Basically, they're trying to say we don't want any more Americans in this region, and we don't want you influencing our culture and the area that we're in. This is going to lead to some problems for Mexico. And it's going to lead Texas going to war. So two conventions were led by Stephen Austin, this initial person who was persuading all these Americans to come into the Texas region and become Mexican citizens. In 1832, the first convention is brought together to negotiate with the Mexican government to lift the laws against Texas. He wants to take off those high taxes and allow more Americans to immigrate to the region. In 1833, with little done after the 1832 convention, he is trying to establish a separate state and have Texas break away from the Mexican government. Austin told the Tejanos, these are Spanish speakers in the Texas area who are not American but under Mexican control, to form their own government when negotiations with Mexico stalled. So he's basically trying to incite a rebellion. March 2nd, 1836, the Republic of Texas declares independence and writes a constitution similar to that of the United States, which makes sense because most of the people are coming from the United States. In response, Mexico starts a military campaign to retake Texas. This is, again, very vast land, very profitable land. The Mexican government doesn't want to just give it up to all these immigrants that just came into the country and now are declaring themselves their own country. One of the most famous battles of the Texas War for Independence is that of the Alamo. And the Alamo was originally an old Spanish mission. It was an old church where services were conducted where they tried to convert people to the Christian faith. And the Texans had turned this mission into a fort for themselves to hold up in. So General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna laid siege to the Alamo on February 23rd, 1836. So they surrounded it, they bombarded it with cannon fire, and waited to breach it. No reinforcements came for the Texans. They held out for almost 2 full weeks, but at dawn on March 6th, Santa Anna's cannons breached the walls, and the Mexican army, which greatly outnumbered the Texas army, broke in and killed all the Texans in the fort. Even that being said, though, after those 13 days of siege, 180 Texans were dead and 1,500 Mexicans were dead. So this was, although it was a victory for the Mexican army, it was a very costly victory in terms of deaths. At Goliad, 300 Texans were executed by order of General Santa Anna. These were people that had surrendered. They had said they wanted protection from the army, but they were murdered against the rules of war. And these two battles are going to become a rallying cry for the Texans trying to gain their independence and trying to defeat the Mexican army. And then we come to the Battle of San Jacinto, which leads to the creation of the Republic of Texas. On April 21st, 1836, the Battle of San Jacinto takes place, and it only lasted 18 minutes. Texan soldiers, as they attacked the Mexican army, screamed, "Remember the Alamo," and "Remember the Goliad." These became battle cries, rallying cries to get them kind of amped up for the battle and getting vengeance for their fallen comrades. So what basically had happened was the Mexican army was getting ready for the battle. They knew where the enemy was located. They thought they were going to battle the next day or so. They actually took a nap, and the Texans charged while they were all sleeping, and that's why the battle lasted so short and why there were so many killed and captured. So 630 Mexicans were killed and 700 were captured, including General Santa Anna, who surrendered all of his troops and granted Texas their independence. The United States was now divided over annexing Texas. So Texas became its own country technically, but they immediately wanted to apply for statehood into the United States. The reason that the United States was so divided over bringing Texas in was because of slavery. Texas was a slave state, and they didn't want to throw off that balance between slave and free states in Congress in the United States. We'll talk about that more later on. Next, we'll talk about war with Mexico and the United States.